salve a tutti, benvenuti.
Good morning, welcome. It's a great pleasure for me to have organised this discussion together with David Hammerstein and Sophie Blumen of the Commons Network. We've still got people arriving, some of our guests, some of our speakers. But in the meantime, we'll get going. We're going to be streaming. We're going to have a streaming link as well, live in a moment, so you'll be able to follow all the Italian interventions in English as well. Now, as you know, I'm a five-star movement member of the European Parliament. I'm a member of the Culture Committee, and we've organised this discussion because I firmly believe that knowledge should be seen as a common good and should be regulated as such. We need to diffuse knowledge as far as possible to ensure that all the citizens of our society can benefit from it. And I am ever more convinced that we need to find practical and legal solutions to ensure that ideas and knowledge can better be shared. The speaker says that if she speaks too quickly, we should give her a sign so that she slows down. So, we're talking about common goods, knowledge. Well, why are we talking about these things? Let me give you an example. Elon Musk, the CEO of Tesla, decided to release his patents, to open them up and ensure that they're accessible to everyone, including his competitors, to ensure that new electric car models could come onto the market. Now, this is similar to what happened at the end of the 1800s when James Watt fought very hard to try and prevent his competitors from getting hold of his intellectual property knowledge. So that basically is the exact opposite of what happened with Tesla. And what happens is that there's a kind of paralysis. So once, for example, patents have run out after the 30 years, then steam vehicles, the production of steam vehicles grew by 30 times. So you can see how limiting patents are. What Tesla, that Mr. Musk did, really boosted innovation and knowledge, and it really goes counter to the current trend. I mean, our society is now fully submerged in capitalist and neoliberal doctrine, and we're told that individual consumption and profit maximization is what makes us happy, but that is not necessarily true. There are studies that show that increased consumption and wealth don't necessarily correspond to an increased level of happiness. These kinds of ideas are actually dangerous as well, because given climate change and environmental problems, well, this doctrine of growth creates dangers that we then see in our daily lives. So, I think the way we need to go is to share knowledge, basing ourselves on the basic good which modern society is based on, and the EU economy as a whole needs to change. I mean, this is something that was already envisaged in the Lisbon strategy. Knowledge was seen as a focus for the European Union. I also believe that intellectual property is all too often used to defend the status quo. Now, I'm a member of the Culture Committee, and during my 2 years in the European Parliament, I've seen a massive battle going on, launched by political groups on copyright. And together with David, I saw what happened with the Treaty of Marrakesh as well, and the fact that it wasn't ratified. I mean, all of this has to change because the European Union needs to decide whether it's going to act in the interest of its citizens or in the interests of multinationals and their lobbyists. as I was saying, I'm a member of the Culture Committee, and there copyright and audiovisual rights are often discussed, but they're often brought up by members of political groups when they want to talk about preserving copyright. I mean, they should be sacrosanct, of course, but what I've also seen during the last 2 years is that this issue is instrumentalized when basically the idea is simply to stick to current positions and maximize profits. Well, what we need is a step change, and we're here to raise these kinds of discussions within European institutions to ensure that European legislators are able to reflect on the issues and come up with better strategies to implement effective policies that can change what currently is done. These are issues that perhaps don't seem linked: common goods, Tesla cars, copyright, etc. But there is a thread that runs through here. They are inextricably linked, and therefore it's important to have a multi-sectoral approach, and that's why here we have people who come from different committees and who deal with different sectors. We need to take up this challenge and ensure that legal instruments that are adopted to boost the diffusion of knowledge can foster productivity rather than monopolies. We need to reappropriate common goods that need to be the flower in the buttonhole of society. I find it absurd that these goods are badly managed and are the ones that are basically ignored. I mean, I think the collective management of common goods is really an opportunity. I'm a member of the Five Star Movement, and we really are very keen on direct democracy. And we believe that the common management of common goods can be a form of direct democracy. I think the area during which we talk about individual rights is now over. Now we have rights such as the right to water, to clean air, to health, good administration, and these are rights that belong to everyone. Technology is very important here because it can help us in what we do, and of course the other thing we need is political will, and that's what we're doing here. I believe that the time is ripe for EU policies to adopt this idea of common goods. That's the challenge that we face, and that would also enable us to relaunch the European project, letting people know that the European Union doesn't only relate to austerity and bank bailouts. I'm going to give the floor to David and Sophie to present their new paper, but I'm just going to close with a couple of quotes. The first comes from Seneca, and the second from the former president of Uruguay, José Mujica. Seneca said, "Non qui parum habet sed qui plus cupit pauper est." Poor are not those who have too little, but those who want too much. And Mr. Mujica was also spoke along the same wavelength. He was on the same wavelength when he said, when we buy something to satisfy a need, we're not buying it with money, but with the time it takes us to earn that money. That really is the difference here. Our time and our lives are what's valuable, and we can't buy time and we can't buy our lives because they're what's actually being consumed when we consume. So that's enough from me. Let me now give the floor to David and Sophie and to anyone else who wants to speak as well later on. Thank you.
Moltissime grazie.
Thank you very much, Isabella.
Thank you for taking the initiative along with the other MEPs, Ms. Auken and Mr. Tamburano, in sponsoring this event. I'm David Hammerstein. I represent the Commons Network. And now Sophie Blumen, who's also from the Commons Network, is going to present a little bit the general idea, and then I will follow on. Thank you all for being here.
Thanks, David. Yes, thank you all for being here and for contributing. we look forward to your responses later. I'm Sophie Bloemen. I co-run the Commons Network together with David, and I run the office in Berlin. So why Commons? Why do we think this is helpful? Yes. So Commons refers to shared resources and the way we govern these resources, the social practice of governing these resources. The Commons perspective allows for a comprehensive, to formulate a comprehensive response to some of the most pressing issues of our time, and to formulate a response based on sustainability, co-creation, democracy, participation. So, what are these pressing issues? These are, and Ms. Aldinolfi already touched on these. This is the progressing enclosure, the privatization of many of our common goods, including natural resources such as water, our forests, and the depletion of those resources, but also of our knowledge resources. What is also a pressing issue is the dependence of people only on the market and the state, and which leads to us being reduced to consumers, which people are really not so comfortable with. People are social beings. They have a capacity and desire to cooperate, and they're not only interested in maximizing their welfare or their material welfare as rational agents. At the same time, it's not only, the Commons perspective is not only a normative response or analysis. It also points to a way of managing our resources and organizing them, including a knowledge, with taking on board these values or principles of participation, co-creation, and equitable access to these resources. As a lot of you know who work in the knowledge realm, access to knowledge and knowledge goods and use our knowledge are fundamental to people's well-being. They're a huge factor in exclusion and inclusion in society. They're a huge factor, as Piketty also, Piketty in his recent book also identified that it's one of the main factors, or the main factors, for determining equality within countries and across countries, having access to knowledge resources, being able to, and the dissemination of knowledge resources and knowledge goods in a country. And knowledge is a typical resource. It's different from many other resources because it's naturally abundant once it's there. Me using knowledge does not take away, in principle, from another person's capacity to use it. Yet, our society, our institutions have made it artificially scarce through intellectual property provisions and closing knowledge. And this becomes even more urgent when we talk about health or climate, when it's about people's lives and when it's about our planet. And if you think about health R&D which leads to our medicines, this of course we can think about sharing this knowledge in many ways. You can think about non-exclusive licenses, think about open access publishing. You can also think of, which is already happening, a participatory and collaborative way of engaging in R&D and providing other incentives than just monopolies at the end to stimulate people to innovate. When we talk about green technologies, renewable energies, which are often also patented, there is a moral imperative to democratize and disseminate these technologies as quickly as possible across the whole world. So we have to think about other ways to manage this knowledge than is currently happening. But so for some of you, yes, please, next. You might think, well, we're already working on sharing knowledge. So what's new? What's new about the Commons approach? What are we? What is so special? So the Commons approach gives us a new vocabulary and a comprehensive ethical framework, which points at doesn't only look at individual rights, but looks at collective concerns and the larger social, democratic, and societal objectives. It looks at solutions that are not market-based, commons-based solutions, resisting commodification, the commodification of many of our resources, which is now a default. So, and a second thing is it's not just about knowledge sharing. It's not just about open. It's about stewarding knowledge and protecting it from enclosure. If you just put it there in the open, it might be enclosed just the same. We have to think about how we governance, what are the access rights. We engage in commons-based knowledge production, not just opening it up once it's produced. Another thing is when you think about climate and renewable energies and these technologies, it's not only about sharing the technologies that are there, it's also about the democratization and dissemination of locally based renewable energy products, community-owned project, traditional knowledge. What is the role of these projects in the transition? How should we support these kind of initiatives? And when we talk about health, it's very important to realize that it's here again, it's also about stewarding the knowledge and not just putting it open for others, for maybe pharmaceutical companies to then come and enclose it just the same. It's about protecting the knowledge and keeping value in the commons. But also, it's not just about biomedical intervention when you talk about health and commons. It's also about the common knowledge of our health. It's not just about expert knowledge. So, third point is that the commons perspective helps think about is how to organize these resources in the different realms of our societies. How can we develop structures for collaboration and have public funding, for example, invest in these structures? And there I just want to touch, I think this is very apparent in the realm of the internet. When we recognize the internet as a common good, as a public good, which we all need to have access to and use, then how we think about how do we manage it? How do we manage it as a commons? And then we very quickly land at infrastructure, the different infrastructures of the internet, from the fiber cables to the Wi-Fi structures to the algorithms. How can we manage them and make sure they're not controlled, or they're controlled and run in the interest of society? So I'll leave it at that and give the word to my colleague David, who's been very active in many of these issues, has contributed a lot, and I'm happy to give him.
Thank you very much, Sophie, for explaining the general idea of the commons and the knowledge commons. I'm going to give 10 points. 10 points very, very quickly, a very little time, of why omnia sunt communia. Those of you know some Latin will know omnia sunt communia. I'll leave it at that. The commons is about dignity. And human dignity means that you have to give the same value to all human beings, according to Kant. That means, and quoting, you have to act that you use humanity, whether in your own person or in the person of others, always at the same time as an end and never as a means. This means that our principal objective is not to take advantage of others, or I would say of nature as well, just for personal gain, because in doing that, we violate their dignity. Here are the 10 points. For commoners, trust, connectedness, cooperation, and justice are more important than just competitive efficiency. Very relevant for EU policy. Number 2, our EU policymakers always talk about this as a win-win situation. Usually it is not. Usually it's a win-lose situation where the selfish gene or the narcissistic self-interest only seeks competitive advantage over others in a situation, gaining advantage and value extraction over others. And this should not be the main objective of our relationships with others or with nature. And this results in inequality and destruction. So what we want from the commons is a real win-win situation. Number 3, and Sophie has mentioned that, the world is upside down. We're in an upside down world. What is really abundant, which is knowledge, is being artificially made scarce. And what is really scarce, which is our natural physical environment, like our climate and natural resources, is being treated as if it was unlimited and we could use as much as we want. And we have to turn that around. Number 4, viva la revolución. Long live the revolution. And especially from internet, we're talking about a disruptive knowledge revolution. lots of the people around this table are promoting a disruptive revolution that's being made possible often in great deal by the digital technologies, which means Wikipedia, open access to science, shared internet infrastructures, the knowledge, Creative Commons licenses, open source medical research, open source ecology, this is sharing of technology, for example, emergency relief using internet, which is done massively, self-organized in the commons, for example, helping refugees, open eco-digital commons, but I could go on and on. The logic of online cooperation is cheap, easy, and can overcome the dominant economic logic of centralized, capital-intensive markets. Number 5, and this is just to make something very, very clear. We're not talking about Uber and Airbnb and Google. Why not? Because these are kind of like comparing community-based agriculture with a giant monoculture of plantations of maybe in the slave period of the US, of the sharecropping. So it's totally different from that, because we are not centralized corporate kingdoms that are not user accountable, that are extracting value out of communities. We are totally the opposite when we're talking about the commons, totally the opposite. So it's not just sharing any information or culture. The real commons-based collaborative economy is not just accessed by the user or the consumer. It is something inserted and managed in a defined community with clear social and environmental or health principles and objectives. So I think this is different. Number 6, how do we fight for the commons in EU law? And here I think many people here will talk about it. So here are some of the legislative agenda that's on the table right now. The digital single market, the reform of the Info Society Directive, that means the new copyright framework. This is very clear. You have all the issues, user-generated content, text and data mining, panorama, ancillary copyright, et cetera, et cetera. The Marrakesh Treaty, spectrum strategy. How do we use all of the radio frequencies for community-based information, community-based internet, so it's not dominated by just a few companies who are extracting knowledge like our data, like our privacy, et cetera, et cetera. All of these things are very, of course, the application of the transparency regulation, clinical trial transparency, all of the health transparency issues. This is all about creating the health commons. Of course, we need patent reform for access to medicines, etc. Okay, that's number 8. Number 7, save the earth, not patent monopolies. At the recent climate conference in Paris, all the poor countries said, let's share the technologies, at least for the poorest countries, because we have to go very quickly in saving the climate. Guess what the answer was from the United States and the European Union? No way. They wouldn't even consider sharing these. And even now at the G20, many of these countries said, just like we have for some medicines a patent pool for malaria or AIDS treatment, why don't we have a patent pool for certain climate technologies so the poorest countries could use them and go quickly, who are now cutting down their forests? Well, this is not even considered. Number 8, I only have 2 more to go. Health comes first. Health is a common good. And today, 80% of the people are excluded from the best treatments to save their lives, in part because of market monopoly logic and lack of transparency, lack of sharing of knowledge. We need structural change for that. 9, save Europe with the knowledge commons. This means democratic participation. I've just learned recently that Pico from Cinque Stelle and the people from the Green Group have prepared how to really use e-democracy so that people can massively and in a transparent way see what the European Parliament is doing on each amendment and being able to give opinions and see what other people are doing, seeing what the lobbies are doing on those opinions. Today we have the technology, but we don't have the political will to save Europe, to get people to have trust in Europe again, in a democratic Europe. We don't have that. There are ways of doing that. And I think I'm very, very optimistic to see the ideas being proposed by the Green Group and being proposed by Cinque Stelle for this democratic retaking of Europe and how the legislative process works. And of course, also there are other issues like the Petitions Committee, European Citizens Initiative, that are part of the European Democratic Commons. And the last point I would like to say is we are organizing with a lot of people in this room a European Commons Assembly that we'll organize in November. We've had a preparation meeting in France 2 weeks ago, and this is not just one event. It's going to be an assembly around Europe that's going to work with these thousands of initiatives that are already on the ground with urban gardening, with urban commons, co-housing, etc., and try to get some policy requests and a movement of sharing around Europe in favor of the commons. So, omnia sunt communia, which I think means, what does it mean? The people from Communia, what does omnia sunt communia mean? Anyone know? What does it mean, Dario?
Bene comune.
El bene comune. It means I think everything is for how everything is common for the people. Actually, I think this was a slogan by the Protestant, wasn't this the Protestant Rebellion or something? Yeah. Magritte, something like that?
I'm not quite sure.
Anyways, very good. Okay, thank you very much. And now I shall present the other two MEPs who are going to give some short comments. First, I will present Magritte Auken, who's a Danish MEP. She has a lot of experience working for the Commons, and lately she's worked a lot also on transparency in the health area, but she's a long-time fighter for the Commons, whether it be nuclear arms or environment as well. Magritte.
Okay, just a few words on the thing. You know, I don't like the word direct democracy because, just to be honest on that, because then you have the referendum democracy and then you never have leaders. You just have people standing like this, saying, let me see where my people go so I can lead them. And then we are in a terrible mess, not having responsible people taking complex decisions. I would hate it, just to be very clear on that. And I think if we tell people that they can do the other thing around, we'll just cheat them. Secondly, I've been so long in this business. But at the other hand, full transparency and access, knowledge, you know, so much democracy could be, if you have the transparency, and then of course the demands to people to work, to do their work, because we have prepared a lot of possibilities for participating in Europe. You have European committees in all our parliaments. That was my party in Denmark when we had a no referendum in 92. We made it so all member states have European committees, and if the the MPs did their work, which they don't do, but if they did their work, they could be very influential on the process, having negotiation, counseling with the ministers before council meetings, and insisting of having papers they understood. You know, you get papers you cannot see what is this here about, and they don't do it because it's easier just to leave it and think I have people to do this here for me. So you know, it's two-sided. If you have the transparency and you have that kind of democracy, where you have the ability to influence, then it's very demanding, and it's not very often told that it's demanding to take this part of it. That was just a little point. Secondly, I would just say in general that what we are talking about here and what we are facing today is basically general good behavior. This going there and keeping knowledge secret. It's a new thing. It was, you know, you go to the family Curie. If Curie said, I'm doing this here for humanity, you know, if you asked her to keep this here secret, she would have a shock. This is done for humanity. And we are having our universities, our research it's for everybody. This is for humanity. So, and today we meet researchers who are imposed silence and secrecy, sometimes for lifelong secrecy. Even if they are public institutions, I met this about the experts in EMA, you know, the European medicine agency, that some of the experts are imposed lifelong secrecy. This is a scandal. And this is, you know, they deprive us the knowledge we have paid them, not, you know, I don't even want to use the word money here. It should just be so basic in the society that this is for everybody. And I could add, and then I just have a few lines on medicine, but I could add, it was an artist who told me that many years ago, say what is that this having the private property within culture. Culture has always been sung, danced, copied, renewed. That's the way we have transported culture broadly to our days. And now it's I get money from my mother, something she wrote, and she passed away in January 1968. Come on, what's nonsense society having this 90 years or what it is, 70 years or ownership? I get furious about it. But then go back to the medicine, because here it's getting worse and worse. And you can see what's happening within the whole pharmaceutical domain. Prices are going up. You are robbing public budgets. And we have still that means Big Pharma, tries to prevent us from having clear knowledge. Does this here help? Does it kill people? Is it better what is already at the market cheaper? And the way they just play with us with the patents. And I think what the work we're doing just now on these issues here are in two issues. We are trying to get much, to regain or gain transparency. We got a law passed in 2014. That was a regulation on clinical trials, really making obligations mandatory on the industry that at latest a year later, after a product was at market, all the results for clinical trials, all the results should be accessible, also in accessible formats, so that normal journalists could find out what's going on here. And they have done everything they could to stop this, everything. And now we are just putting some heavy complaints to EMA, which we are going to the Ombudsman on that is that's an example, the HPV vaccine, just to tell you that you don't know a bit about it. And they keep secret, the side effects. They are almost killing those who try to prevent, to present knowledge here and raise doubts. And they are we cannot even get access. Well, of course we must do that, but access to conflict of interest. And now we can see, I think even EMA, we know that from EFSA, but EMA is soaked in conflict of interest. So just to say, the battlefields without very abstract words, to me, direct democracy is very abstract. But good battlefields for transparency, good work, and we can do it. So very much welcome your organization here.
Thank you very, very much, Margrethe. That was very, very clear, and the message gets through. Now, Dario Tamburrano, who is a member also of the Cinque Stelle group, and he works on he also works on environmental issues and many other issues to do with the common good and the bene comune. Dario.
Sì, io rappresento.
Thank you. Well, I represent the Common Good Intergroup as well. And I would just like to say that things are moving in the European Parliament. We've been in Parliament for 2 years, and it's a very conservative Parliament which is keen on maintaining the status quo, and yet something is moving thanks to the Intergroup. In plenary, we recently proposed an amendment on the New Deal for energy and energy consumption. We think that consumers can produce energy and renewable energies, and that should be part of the common good as well. So we are doing something. Our amendment, unfortunately, was not carried. We still have to work on it. 47 out of 650 votes, unfortunately, is what we obtained. However, given the current situation, we can still consider this a very good result. To go back to Omnia Sunt Communia, well, could I link this up with something which I was thinking about shortly before coming here? I was going through the park looking at the geese and the ducks on the pond and walking around the lawn with the daisies, and all of this made me think of biology, of cells, of DNA, and all the things that create color and life, and that this life can be reproduced thanks to photosynthesis and the sun. All these codes we have in life are free of charge, are given to us free of charge. Man has made all of this something which you have to pay for. We've moved away from the very essence of what our planet is all about. We've turned it into something you have to pay for, a closed planet which is only available to some people. For instance, take the patents for pharmaceutical products. It's as if somebody were knocking on the door saying, I'm sick, I need drugs, and the answer is no. You could turn around and say that the people who say no are killing that person off. If we want to ensure that the dignity of mankind is maintained, and if we refuse to provide the appropriate cures for these people, well, then we're simply murderers. We very often speak about open knowledge, but we don't really talk about open innovation of an immaterial nature, for instance, versus the practical achievements of man. There's a recent example of what I mean. The liberalization of patents has meant that new technology has now been made available for society. Any new technological innovation has led to revolutions, and technology can really lead to revolution in society, which is then followed by the politicians. And as politicians, it is our responsibility to identify those new technological innovations, to make knowledge available, to define the appropriate legal frameworks so that that knowledge will be available to as many people as possible, so that fair progress is made, so that a broad consensus is achieved. Now, we've been referring to the use of technology for protecting the environment. We're faced with many a challenge at the moment, and I think that the way to meet these incredible challenges are access to energy, stabilization of the climate. To do this, free knowledge must be available, not just in Europe, but in countries where there is a trend, an evolving trend. There is development which is taking place, but it's still based on the old model. If we have free knowledge, open hardware, it will be possible to ensure that machines are built, very innovative machines, renewable sources of energy will be further developed. We believe that this is the way that we will be able to ensure a possible future. Now, in Parliament, things are undoubtedly happening. I am on the Energy Committee, and I can assure you that there's quite a lot of haggling going on, quite an animated debate. I'm also on STOA, which is the panel for science and technology. I'm very proud to be a member of that panel, and I do receive information where reference is made to open hardware, sharing of knowledge on the internet. This is what the scientists are telling us to do, and suggesting that we as legislators should try to encourage. But very often these documents aren't disseminated beyond a very small circle of individuals. When we go back to our country, what we consider to be the key technology, the best future for Europe, when we go back home and explain that, it's considered utopia. It's considered to be material coming from some sort of Taliban fundamentalist. We really have to think in terms of the the real economy and the real meaning of humanity, which is sharing and progressing together to achieve greater dignity and to achieve more well-being for all of the individuals living on this planet. Thank you. Thank you, Dario.
I would like to give the floor to people who are around the table. We have, and first of all, from Warsaw, who's joining us, is Alek Tarkowski, who's a long-time activist for Creative Commons and for digital, all kinds of digital internet issues, who comes from the group called Centrum Cyfrowe. I'm sorry, my pronunciation. Okay, Alek?
Here in Brussels, we use the name of our association, which we co-founded with other organizations. It's called Komunia, very fitting for this meeting. We're a European association on the digital public domain, so the issues I will be talking are related mainly to digital issues, but I think some of them have relation to the broader aspects of the commons. Firstly, I think it's very important, and I appreciate this effort to build sort of a shared theme between efforts which in the end are quite varied. There is some connection between energy, digital bytes, environment, and quality of living and health, but you know, in the end, that's almost all of our world, and being able to call it the commons and showing how wide-spanning this approach is I think, very important. But to make some more specific comments, I think one issue we're facing in policy debates where we try to promote what we call public domain, but we could also be calling it the commons in the digital sphere, is that we would prefer to move away from speaking in purely economic terms, but the debate makes it very difficult to do so. So, for example, the digital debate is currently focused on the digital single market, and a lot of the non-market issues are very quickly simply, put in parentheses as not really related to what's being the agenda right now. Well, so one way of dealing with this is to try to show economic value of the commons, which I think is a very important thing to do. As long as we're aware of the pitfalls. So for instance, in Poland, about 5 years ago, we had a big and pretty typical debate whether culture is a commodity or not. So in the end, probably the most sensible approach is to say that there is economic value to culture. There is development coming out of culture, but it's also important to remember that culture is a lot more than that. But I think the risk is that once you start using the economic arguments, they tend to dominate. So it would be better if we could speak purely about the value of the commons as such, but I think in practical terms in policy debates that is often not enough. So to give one example, a big topic in the digital area is now an issue called text and data mining, which you can see as sort of one more iteration of such issues as open data or maybe even big data. It's basically the ability of researchers to use available data and text sources to do, with the assistance of computers, very advanced research. And there's an idea, there's a whole debate whether this should be sort of in the commons, so you should have freedom to do such research, or whether this should be seen as some form of proprietary right to do such research. And we would prefer an approach where we would say there are no rights to using this data. It's very similar to reading. Reading is not something that's governed by copyright. But in practical debates, we're not there. We're talking about exceptions and limitations, which are immediately sort of saying it is a commodity. Let's only discuss where the where the balance is. So I think this is one approach where it's very hard to speak just purely in the language of commons. I think the good things happening in Europe are happening in several areas. They concern open access in research, which you mentioned in your paper as sort of an important step towards a approach to knowledge commons. Similarly, in some of the open data rules, I would say we're seeing elements of this commons approach. One challenge I see there is that this is rarely called as such. So this is not called the commons approach, and I think this is a big problem. And second, we don't see yet attempts to build a policy that tries to connect these fields together. So we have open access policy, we have open data policy, some interesting things happening in culture, albeit this culture is called public sector information. It's a very weird way to talk about culture, but this is not connected, and maybe connecting these elements would be very powerful. And two last quick points I want to make. I would suggest looking at areas where Europe is regulating the issues of skills. For instance, the skills that are interesting for me are so-called digital skills. digital competences. There are framework for that developed in the Joint Research Center. And for instance, Digital Skills Framework, DigComp, includes what we could call skills that support the commons. So for instance, even basic things like understanding open licensing. This might seem like something very insignificant, but the value of education and of standards that include this in, for instance, educational programs, I think can be very high. And last point I want to make, I think one way of talking about the commons that could be quite important today in Europe is commons as something that's sustainable and self-sufficient. So for instance, we have in Poland a very interesting organization and movement called Cohabitat, which is a movement mainly of architects, but also of makers, doing open hardware, doing open architecture. They started with building houses out of clay and straw and openly sharing the designs. Now they're trying to build self-sufficient and self-sustainable housing. And I think this is an important language because it goes beyond the idea of sharing to saying that this is, this is prudent, this is frugal, this is something that will allow us to be sustainable in difficult times that might be ahead of us. And I think this is a language that could catch on. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much, Alec. You got to the point. You've mentioned some really important, interesting ideas. Now, Diego Naranjo from the main European Digital Rights Organization, EDRI.
Yeah, thanks. Well, for EDRI, I think one of the most important points in the paper that the Commons Network produced is the issue of the copyright reform, of course. For those of you who are not aware or who are not knowledgeable of the copyright law in the European Union, the oldest law is from 2001, so it's pre-everything that you do online right now, basically, pre-WordPress, pre-Facebook, pre-YouTube. So it's really outdated. Maybe it was not even up to date when it was published, but definitely it's not updated now. The plans of the Commission don't seem to go any further than that, and they are trying to patch some of the failures, and they have, by not going through a really thorough update as it is needed. So just one example on the lack of the harmonization that the InfoSoc directive, this law from 2001. Well, there are 2 million different ways of implementing the directive. That's, I think, the best way the European Union has found to sabotage themselves and not creating the digital single market that they're trying to create in the European Union. And well, this doesn't, this framework doesn't improve how authors are being remunerated, which is one of the critical issues at the moment. And there are many ways that we can explore on how to do that. It could be maybe via public funding, for example, Ken Loach, and the film director was talking about trying to do something like we do with theaters and trying to make them like some sort of a public good that we need to promote from the institutions and not a private network at the moment. Fermín Muguruza, the Basque musician, said how he couldn't be the musician he's at the moment if it wasn't because of the music of the tapes at the moment and the vinyls that he had shared with others. So I think the way that we form ourselves as musicians or as music fans in general is also developed. It's not up to date to the current legislative framework, so that needs to be also addressed. And one of the ways to do this should be promoting the public interest in the European Union related to copyright and patents and other IP-related issues. And the think tank of the European Union on these topics is the Observatory on IP Infringements. And their motto is definitely not omnia sunt communia. It's really targeted at right holders. It's, although it has many civil society people inside, like EDRI and others, but it's still producing a lot of not evidence-based reports that we are wasting our time to revise them and to try to make them better, although we try sometimes too much, and we waste our time for very bad outcomes. And finally, I think that we have in EDRI, we have highlighted nine topics in our recently launched copy fail campaigns. We have pointed out 9 main failures of the current copyright regime, and I think that could be a good start to make a change in the European Union copyright framework.
Diego, what's the name of the hashtag of your copyright campaign? That's very good. False.
Yes, we are using either fixed copyright, which is a general hashtag, or otherwise copy fails.
Yeah, they're excellent. It's an excellent summary of the failures of the copyright system. Copy fails, and it's part of the fixed copyright campaign. Very good. Now, I would like to present. See the order, just a minute. I'd like to present Anne-Catherine Lorraine. She's also a member of Communia, but she's an advisor of the Green Group here in the Parliament, and a long-time worker. She's a lawyer as well on the Commons and on access to knowledge, both on a European and an international level. Anne-Catherine.
Thanks. Thanks a lot for the invitation to speak, and thanks to the Commons Network, and particularly to Sophie and David for their important work. I would like to focus on the copyright reform, so I hope that my intervention can complement yours, Diego. For copyright reform to taking into account a commons approach, the main focus should be on putting boundaries to the existing copyright system. So we have several policy options for that we can use at the same time. The first of them is to have more copyright exceptions to access, use, and share knowledge and information goods. But the thing is that you will never have knowledge and information goods as an expression in a piece of regulation dealing with copyright, because here we are dealing with a totally different system. The paradigm is really different, because it's based on a default system revolving around exclusive rights, and all the exceptions are by definition limited. They are limited by nature. So in order to fix that, you can have exceptions, but you can also have formalities. For instance, you can request copyright to be registered, not to limit the protection, because formalities on copyright protection is forbidden by international law, but you can, for instance, require right holders to have a registration of their rights if they want to claim infringement actions in courts when it comes to enforcement of copyright. It's already the case informally in some countries. So at the European level, it would be a possibility to limit this default protection system. And to come back on exceptions, among the exceptions that are currently discussed, you have the freedom of panorama, and maybe Dimi will elaborate more on that. But the freedom of panorama is very interesting because it touches upon another aspect of the commons, which is the public space. It means that it would allow people to take pictures of works of art permanently based in the public space, and then to share those pictures on social networks, for instance. Another policy option is to prevent intellectual property rights to expand more. First, by limiting the duration of the protection of IP rights, and indeed 70 years after the death of the author is already very long. By preventing also the creation of new rights, and maybe you've heard that publishers are currently looking for the creation of a new neighboring right, which would obviously go in the wrong direction. Another way to prevent IPR to expand is to limit the scope of exclusive rights on in the digital environment. For instance, the European Court of Justice ruled 2 years ago that a certain way of linking on the internet would not give rise to a new right of communication to the public, because a new public would not be targeted and there wouldn't be a new act of communication to the public. And this is very important because the way you interpret the scope of exclusive rights is also impacting the way you're using the internet, and the internet as a commons as well. Another policy option is about the public domain, which is by definition not protected by intellectual property, and which as such would deserve to be acknowledged and safeguarded by the legislator. In other words, it should be prohibited to have abusive reappropriation of what is already in the public domain. What is in the public domain should stay in the public domain. And in Julia Reda's report on the reform of the InfoSoc directive, there's a paragraph 31 saying, and I'm quoting, calls on the Commission to effectively safeguard public domain works, which are by definition not subject to copyright protection, urges the Commission, therefore, to clarify that once a work is in the public domain, any digitization of the work which does not constitute a new transformative work stays in the public domain. Also calls on the Commission to examine whether right holders may be given the right to dedicate their works to the public domain in whole or in part. So the Parliament already adopted something on the commons, if you like, or on the protection of the public domain in the framework of the copyright legislation. And the last part of this paragraph is also very interesting because it deals with the voluntary dedication of rights by right holders to the public domain. And this is another aspect that is less discussed about, but which we shouldn't forget about. Another important thing is to look after our public interest institutions, such as libraries, museums, archives, and to support them in their public service mission to digitize their collection and to ease better access to their digitized collection by users. And to conclude, maybe I would say that on the legislative level, and particularly at the European level, we are very far away from having the commons recognized as a new category of law, because it's so different. But the first step towards that recognition might be to have international organizations such as WIPO, the World Intellectual Property Organization, recognizing or citing public domain as such, as something deserving protection. And actually, interestingly, it's on the work program of WIPO at the moment. They have had official discussions about the protection of the public domain, reports by academics on the relinquishment of rights by right holders. So it's definitely on the right track, hopefully. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Anne-Catherine. I'm sorry that you say that we're so far away. What makes me reflect that social practice on the ground is so far away from the institutional legal practice. I mean, people are sharing all over. The commons exists in many facets of our society. Nevertheless, our legal structure, it goes in the opposite direction. So this is an important thing to keep into mind. Now, I'd like to ask Dimitris Dimitrov, who represents Wikimedia, and who's also campaign. I think he represents probably one of the most successful knowledge commons in the world, which is Wikipedia.
Yeah, hi, I'm Dimi from Wikimedia, and I'm normally always expected to talk about copyright, but I want to go back to patents in a bit. So maybe just to explain where we're coming from. So we're Wikimedia. We do free knowledge projects like Wikipedia. And the idea behind this is that we're trying to grow the knowledge commons. And we do so in two ways. In this case, that's my job, trying to push through legislative fixes that help protect and grow this knowledge commons. Safeguarding the public domain would be a major thing we could do in this direction, a realistic thing we can do in this direction in the next 2 years together. But B, and this is very important, we use free licenses, like the ones Creative Commons provide, to try to convince as many individuals and organizations as possible to voluntarily contribute and share in this knowledge commons. And why is this important? Well, when I take a picture, or when I make a painting, or sing a song, I can, at practically no cost, license it freely, share it with everybody, and then everybody can use it, and then it's part of the knowledge commons. However, we talked about Elon Musk and patents at the very beginning of this conversation, and what he did was also great. He took a technological patent and he shared it with everybody. However, patenting something costs me thousands of euros usually. So when it comes to patents, I don't have the option of just taking what I just invented, be it medicine or be it a new technological tool, and just sharing it with everybody, because this will be very, very expensive for me. But if I don't do it, then somebody else can just turn up, patent it, and make money out of it. So I think a very quick and dirty fix and something that is realistic and we can push through the EU in maybe this legislative period would be sort of saying that the EU Patent Office should grant free patents, free of charge patents to everybody who is willing to share the technology freely share the technology freely. So something like a free Creative Commons for patents. I think this would be a quick and dirty fix and would go a really long way. Thanks.
Thank you. Dimi, you've given a real simple, commonsensical idea. I mean, if we lived in a commonsensical world, and I think of the economy, it kind of reminds me of the proposals also by Christian Felber of the economy of the common good, who says that companies and private companies that are willing to share knowledge should get preferences in EU grants and all these kind of favor. But I think if the IPA would make that free of charge, it'd be wonderful. Great idea.
Just a comment.
Dario?
Sì, relativamente al discorso dei brevetti.
Yes, or with regard to patents and going back to this novel hardware, I wanted to say that the European Research Centre talks about open innovation in industry, and open industry is a kind of middle way between having things completely free of charge and the possibility for businesses to make profits from common goods and open source and open hardware. And I think this is something that could work. I mean, it's something that's already happening in certain areas. Let me give you one example. There are businesses that have 3D printers projects, and they provide instructions online for people to be able to carry out 3D printing, and then their businesses provide the service, so they have the machinery. So there are two different things here. One, some businesses actually provide the service, whereas others send out the machines so people can build them, and these machines can then be developed via the community, the online community. There's a kind of industry, perhaps we could describe it as an industry, although the word is a bit old-fashioned. There's one in the Netherlands. It started in 2010. It produces 3D printers, and it provides projects online so that people can build these kinds of things, these printers, using parts that are freely available. They also sell the printers themselves, of course. That's another sideline. So there's a whole community that's emerged, and they develop things, and then the business takes the ideas from this community and then produces them. So this is a community of enthusiasts. I mean, obviously, only a small percentage of users is going to go ahead and actually build a machine, because you need certain skills that not everyone have. But this community of users helps the business and ensures that innovations can be provided at a reasonable cost to those people who don't necessarily have the skills to build the machine. So that was just a very brief example. For example, let me give you another example. I had an electric engine for an inflatable boat. One small part broke, and I had to buy a whole new engine, because no one could repair the cable, the small part that had broken, because no one knew how the engine had worked. So I had to buy this whole engine so that I could enjoy my boat when I was on holiday. I mean, this is the advantage of these open source communities. Imagine an engine that cost less, that could be repaired by any DIY enthusiast who had the tools and the skills, and a business, a company that provided the engine, the ready-made engine, so sold the engine, but also provided the spare parts that people can also get elsewhere, and also this business could provide the knowledge as well. So things would be completely different then. Things would cost a great deal less. I mean, let's look at the third world, for example. I mean, in the third world, sometimes you don't get complex technical assistance, so these kinds of models could help.
I think that he has summarized what the commons means for environment, for climate change, for sharing, for the developing world, with a very concrete idea. And if we if we don't have the commons, we're going to keep on with planned obsolescence. We're not going to have a circular economy. And if we keep on with this idea, like that Anne-Catherine and others said, we're very far away from the paradigm because we're still in the selfish gene paradigm. But that selfish gene paradigm is we could see the result around us in the world today. Anyways, I'd like to now present our last civil society contributor, because I think Martin Pejon hasn't arrived yet, and Renata Avila's had some kind of problem to arrive. Yanis Natzis, who represents the European Public Health Alliance. He's a real specialist in medicines and health, and he's been working for many years here in Brussels also for the Health Commons.
Thank you very much for the invitation and for organizing such a topical debate. I will continue, since we're talking about patents, I would like to share with you my experience, my recent experience. Late last year, the United Nations Secretary General decided that it's high time that we looked at all of the aspects when it comes to pharmaceutical innovation, when it comes to medicines. Therefore, he convened a high-level panel with 16 world personalities, and there were 178 submissions from different governments, institutions, individuals, with ideas about what to do about medical innovation and the future. What should we do? Should we change anything? And in February, the United Nations High-Level Panel, so these 16 personalities, they convened a global dialogue in London to listen to some of the authors of all of these submissions coming from, as I said, institutions. So the European Commission had the submission on access to medicines and what should change. And there, if one reads that and compares that, for instance, to the submission by the Dutch government, which currently holds the presidency of the European Union, the European Commission was all about defending patents. And it was all about saying that the IPR system does not affect, and definitely does not affect in a negative manner, the access problems that we have, no longer in low or middle income countries, but also in Europe. And in Europe nowadays, there is, I would say, a fully fledged access to medicines crisis in a lot of different countries. We have, even in Belgium, for instance, if you get hepatitis C, you won't have access to the latest treatment because it's very expensive. You will have to get cirrhosis in order to have access to this latest treatment. So this is, as you're saying, and this is the theme of this event today, we are seeing that even when it comes to health, and this is also the current political appetite, I would say, in the European Commission, to see it only from the perspective of competitiveness and growth. It's worth reading the latest document that came out from DG Santé, so the DG responsible for health, which outlines the vision of DG Santé for health. And there are issues, there are even headlines such as safety against competitiveness. The abuse of the precautionary principle. Yes, indeed. Yes. And this is telling, this is illustrative of where we stand today and where the European Parliament has to take a clear stance. Unfortunately, and Margarete mentioned some of the issues, the problem is that especially with the current Commission, when it comes to health and when it comes to pharma specifically, a highly sensitive and controversial issue, the European Parliament is kept in the dark. That is not to say that there are not very sensitive discussions happening, mostly, unfortunately, behind closed doors. As we speak, the European Council, so the governments are discussing something which is almost revolutionary, being put forward by the Dutch presidency. And they're talking about reforming the IPR system, starting from some baby steps, one would say, but very, very important steps for the political context here in Brussels. Looking at data and market exclusivity and SPC, the so-called additional forms of patent protection. And we will see if the Council agrees. In the coming weeks, we will have the final version of these conclusions, and I'm sure there will be a lot of pressure coming from important and quite significant and sizable interests trying to change the wording in these conclusions. That is to say that it's high time that we looked at the real core issues of these problems, and I think the accessibility and affordability crisis that we have when it comes to health and to medicines specifically gives us this political momentum to act and to have significant political change. But this momentum, we need to seize it. Otherwise, there is this window of opportunity, indeed, mostly because of the high prices of medicines and because of what I just described. You need to be seriously sick in order to have access to your medicines, because otherwise the system will go bankrupt. And countries like France will go bankrupt, not only the usual suspects in the south or east of Europe. But this political momentum will last for what? Maximum 1-2 more years. Therefore, we need to act now, and we need to bring this discussion to the center stage, and we need to have this discussion under the sun and not behind closed doors. And this is my message, because what you're saying today, and you've identified it very correctly, and this is unfortunately, again, the message coming also from the Commission, that we treat health, and not to mention pharmaceutical products specifically, not as a public good, but as a commodity. And this is the trend. It's clear, actually. I mean, the masks have come off, and I think it's high time that the gloves come off as well. And we need to bring this to the center stage, and we need to have the European Parliament involved. We need to talk about regulatory capture and conflicts of interest. We need to look at the role of regulators. The EMA, the European Medicines Agency, gets 80%, and I'm done, 80% of its funding from industry fees. This has to be discussed, because at the end of the day, it has to do with our health. These are just some thoughts, and thank you very much once again for the invitation.
Great, Yanis. I think you said we have a window of opportunity for the Commons. Let the sun shine in to see the transparency. Health is not a commodity. Health is a commons. I think very clear, worrisome message. I'd like to open up now for questions and comments from all of you here. Please state your affiliation and please. No, I think let's just see if someone. Yes, please, you want to say something? No? No one wants to say anything? Okay, if there are no comments, then Magritte, and then Sophie, and then Alec.
And just a little remark to what Yanis just said. You know, this whole, I don't know if we really have described this, what I call this, the fast way for the, access to medicine is not any longer people's access to medicine, but it's medicine's fast way access to people. To market, yeah, yes. Yeah, it's a fast track, and it's a way to use one of the words in the cooperation we're doing. It is deregulation by stealth. Yeah, that's very precise. Deregulation by stealth, which just to explain easily to you, instead of using all the legislation we have done on clinical trials, they go directly to the patients before, and it's easy to find patients. All of you know people suffering from dying from cancer, asking for new medicine and absolutely being willing to expose themselves for that. All of us have seen that. It's easy to find the customers, and we have no knowledge about what does it medicine help, does it kill people, is it no knowledge will be available after this year. It has nothing to do with creating safety and anything. It's just a way to sell medicine to get easier at the market and avoiding all the control. And I was told the other day from one of the NGOs that, well, we could almost give up because they have manipulated, or what you call it, the socialist and the commission and so on and so forth. In my opinion, it's not true, because it's so easy to respond to this here. If we, go out and tell in normal language what's going on here, people are furious when I tell about it and say that cannot be true. And of course, we have to stop this here. And there, I think that in some of these issues here, they are so, incredible what they're doing. What they're doing on the pricing. They tried in the United States, in several states, to get full transparency on the pricing. And that was lobbied to stop. But still, you find it in the New York Times, a very good article on how this was done and how it was already there, shown how much in pharmaceutical pricing is marketing and lobbying and so on, and how little is research and development. And we should, of course, also know how much is public paid in their research and development. And I think if we are better to tell about this here in normal daily language and describe what's going on, it's not very difficult to get people on our side and to make it easier for politicians, well, make it more difficult for them to be manipulated from industry and easier for them to fight the battle. Just to, I think it wasn't so bad as I heard it from the NGOs, because I think we can win this case.
Thank you, Margarete. I think she's mentioned something very important, which is the issue of incentives. The idea that enclosure and keeping everything secret and only for personal massive profits, like the pharmaceutical industry, is the only incentive for innovating is obviously false, and it's not proven by any scientific or academic social science research. Alec, and then Sophie.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to make a quick comment that I really appreciate the example of open hardware given by Mr. Tamburano, and it's from a perspective of looking at tactics, how to forward the strategy. I think open hardware is a very good case because it's at least not yet very controversial. It has, as you said, very good language you can use to speak about innovation, speak about industry, which I think is accepted. It's just like with open access, these are, potentially things that can work more quickly than other subjects and just help us grow this momentum.
Yes, I think it's very important tonight, the relationship between the immaterial knowledge commons and the physical commons that are much more linked than we think. Sophie?
Yeah, just to follow up on this point that Anne-Catherine made is about how to make sure that that intellectual property doesn't expand further. And I think one important point there is also trade and the trade policy of the European Union, where we have been exporting our high standards, or whatever if you want to attribute that word high, or our standards of intellectual property to the rest of the world. And TTIP will also, if you already read the positions and the ideas, they will like to, what do they call it? Confirm the practices. So both the EU and the US have these high standards of IP already, so they might not harmonize, but they will enshrine in international law through this TTIP the current practices. So it will be very hard to go back on them. And even they might even add maybe here and there a little tweak to expand a little bit further. So if you talk about the Dutch initiative on possible IPR reform, this is something that should also be kept in mind, because it might have become totally impossible. And then what I think is a very important discussion, in which Alec brought up, is the idea of what arguments do we use for the commons? What flies policy-wise, what flies politically? And this discussion, we should actually go with the economic arguments because that's the paradigm that people listen to. If you come up with other arguments, doesn't really fly. But I think, I'm not so sure, and you also said there should be a balance, but I think it's really important to explore this discussion, because we will always lose, or it's harder to, with the economic discussion, it's why would we treat it ourselves in that way? I think there's other more normative, ethical arguments that might be much stronger. But again, for me, it's also a question. I'd be very interested to hear what people think about this. Do we try to go with the economic arguments and say, actually, commons creates a lot of value, it's great for growth? Or do we say, well, actually, this is about humans, this is about people, this is about sustainability, it's about our planet, it's about not commodifying things that are common goods, and using these and hoping that there might be a cultural shift in our understanding.
Actually, I think the most stable economy, the economy that's not the casino speculative economy, which has caused all of our problems, the obsession with economic growth, the obsession of endless expansion of the globalization, is the cause of all the problems we have in the world today. I think that of climate change, of gross inequality, and it's precisely a circular economy that's a community based, where people have trust in the people who they're working with, that one of our only hopes for stability, and sharing technology and all those things. But so I think we have the best economic arguments. But anyways, more comments. Dimi?
Yeah, maybe just on Well, on the difficult strategical question whether we should go or not into economic arguments, well, that's a call that needs to be made at any given time. At Wikimedia, we invest most of our energy in the past year and a half to come up with economic arguments because, we feel like we have the, let's say, softer arguments down. I mean, we are winning there. And the only argument that we might not win is the economic one. But unfortunately, the way this house is stacked right now, you will get no majority without at least some economic arguments. So, it's very important to work on that as well. And we need to start coming up with a credible explanation why, let's say, Wikipedia or other knowledge commons are good for the economy. And it's very hard to make, but we are investing in this direction because we need that. We need a credible proof of that.
One little remark on that. I'm not sure I agree because, when we are talking about, again, pharmaceutical, I always mention that they are gangsters and they are robbing us. And, that's a very strong economical argument for the society. And I think lots of these things here, it's not so difficult to explain that the society is also benefiting economically for having a shared knowledge and accessibility instead of leaving everything to those who have only one interest, to rob us. And robbery is not a healthy way of creating growth and economy.
If I can just add something, like in helping Mr. Tamburano and the other members in the intergroup of common goods. So talking about one experience, it was the amendment that he mentioned before. So I don't know if talking about the market language or the humankind language is about the value underpinning, we know them, is the words we can use to get some interest of the different parties that kind of might switch around our ideas. That's the most important part. So we can use words to express the same values underpinning it, but to convince different political vision that might still haven't understood that there are people who vote for them that might actually go on board with the idea. So that's a big challenge, is like we use the right words. And so maybe on every dossiers that we might treat in the next months, if any ideas of how to include it, it would be send it to Mrs. Tamburano and the other members of the intergroup, because it would be good to use it as a tool to see, okay, experience base.
Totally on board. And our idea is to have an open platform to pick up those ideas. And obviously, we don't have the best ideas to communicate those, but they're probably out there. Is someone? Dario, or should we close, or someone more? Okay. Isabella? Conclusione?
L'unica cosa che posso dire.
Well, to conclude, the only thing I can really say in political terms is that there are many good intentions, but the road to hell is paved with good intentions, as we all know. I mean, I could give you examples from the field of copyright or medicines, but I think the core of all of this really is conflict of interests and the lack of information that's received because of conflicts of interest, because there are members, there are officials in the European Commission who have massive conflicts of interest. I mean, the other committee I'm involved in is the Constitutional Affairs Committee, so this is something I've heard discussed a great deal. And as soon as you've got conflicts of interests, politicians, experts, but also in pharmaceutical companies, then at that point we're never ever going to get a change. People are never going to change, because they tell us, for example, certain things about what we need to be healthy, because we don't only have medicines for cancer or whatever, but parts of their business model relates on nutritional complements and vitamins. So we're bombarded by all this information. We were told we need to take vitamins and supplements to be healthy. So against that barrage of information, people will never understand that they just have to live more simply. To give you an example, someone in my own family changed what they were eating and changed their cholesterol level from 320 to 185 without any medicines or whatever. And then, basically you need to give people information on health and change what people eat. I know that in the European Parliament, certainly what we eat is, dubious, to say the least. So conflict of interest, that's really the problem. Unfortunately, from the point of view of a member of Parliament as well, vanity is also a problem. Because as politicians, we need to give up those expectations of vanity. All too often, just to get our names on a report, we basically give up on any principle that we may have held when we came into the European Parliament. And if we can't give up on that vanity, then we're not going to be able to change anything. I hope that all of these ideas are moved forward. Unfortunately, what I've seen in the last 2 years is that many people who had ideals very quickly lost them. My intention is to base myself on education, to start from children, to ensure that they can be free citizens and not simply subjects who are given poor information and who are subject to the idea that they need to be consumers at all costs, because otherwise industry can't develop, we can't have a decent level of well-being, and we can't have economic growth. This idea that you can't be happy without consuming is really a big part of the problem, I think.
Allora, relativamente qui va.
Well, I think that we should think on the one hand of co-legislation on individual files, the amendments we table, the battles we wage in committees and in plenary. Now, for those of you who are part of the network, you follow the way things are evolving and you have a fair idea of the situation, but do contact us, whether you wish to be provocative or whether you have complaints to make or whatever. I'm always prepared to produce what I call esoteric amendments, and I've planned to come up with one such amendment for each and every legal provision, even if they are turned down. You never know. The more obstinate you are, the more determined you are, the more likely you are to achieve something. There's no point in doing nothing. So you might as well try for it. And as I was saying earlier on, technological innovation can lead to cultural innovation, and this is the driving force for society in general. And politicians are lagging somewhat behind. And we're all trying to do what Isabella has already suggested. We're trying to work in terms of education. This is a very powerful tool if we wish to change society. However, we don't have a lot of time. There's climate change, for instance, which is making us speed up, and which is really breathing down our necks, as it were. And that's it, basically.
Yes. As a famous revolutionary once said, the revolution can wait, but lunch is getting cold. So, omnia sunt communia. Thank you very, very much. And it's been very, very interesting. This is an ongoing thank you, please, for all of the participants who've come from close and from far, especially to the Commons Intergroup, to Margrethe Auken, And this is an ongoing thing. It's totally open. It's totally transparent. And this is the party shall go on. Thank you very much.
And we are glad to, if someone wants to join us.
If you would like to join us for lunch, a wonderful Piemontese food at a nearby restaurant, you're invited to join us.